Welcome back. What exactly is a trade war and why are we starting one now? Joining us for more are Michael Snipes, an economics instructor at USF Sarasota Manatee, Keith Fitzgerald, political science professor at New College, and Rod Thompson of the RevolutionaryAct.com. There are many things in life I do not understand. This is one of them. We have something that the Washington Post just wrote, and let's put it up on the screen. President Trump is starting a trade war against China. At the same time, he is starting one against the countries we would need help to help us against China, and he's doing this while also trying to undo sanctions on a Chinese company that bipartisan majorities in Congress think might be a real national security threat. Rod, this is what I don't understand. They're talking about ZTE, which is a Chinese manufacturer of cell phones, which the U.S. military has banned from sale on military bases because of the Chinese technology they are concerned about may be used for espionage.
Right. So I'm not super familiar with the ZTE thing, just that it exists and that's going on. But as far as the rest of it, the broader picture of trade, I would take exception to the contention that Trump is leading us into a trade war. I believe we've been in a trade war for a lot of years with China. It's just that we were more the punching bag and they were more the puncher. And the reason I say that is because they have, through the WTO rules, they have been able to enact enormous tariffs on imports. They have also cheated the system by requiring mergers with their companies, by stealing intellectual property of U.S. companies. This is all well known. This has been going on for a long time. And the reason why tariffs can be used in this is it gives us extraordinary leverage with a country that needs us to be buying their stuff to get a better trade agreement than we have with them.
I don't know a Democrat or a Republican which would disagree with what Rod just said, except I don't want to let go of the ZTE thing right now because that smells bad, Keith.
It's a suspicious thing. It doesn't make any sense. And I think there's a general concern, a general belief on the part of a lot of people that the president sometimes is an agent of other powers, and because he has loans and that sort of thing. And you know, if you don't want people to think you're guilty, you have to not act guilty. But I can't think of any rational justification for why the United States is bailing out a Chinese firm with whom we have some real disagreements.
And I want to get into what is a trade war, but Rod, I do want to ask you, there are a lot of business entanglements that we're hearing about every single week, and then the president himself says he is concerned about Chinese jobs. I thought he was more concerned about American jobs.
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes, you know, we've been around this before. Sometimes the president says stuff, I don't know why he says it, but on the point of the trade war, and honestly, I got to tell you, I don't understand the whole thing with Canada. It makes no sense to me. Well, I mean, Canada's just a great neighbor and all, and it's peanuts by and large. China makes a lot of sense to me.
And we'll get to Canada in a moment, but Michael, let me get to you. Why has this been so vexing to both Republican and Democratic administrations up to now? This is not news that we have a huge trade imbalance with China.
That's true. And one of the things is, I think might be some of the confusion is, what exactly is it we're talking about? What are the metrics that we're talking about? When we have the president saying that we have a trade deficit with Canada, in some sense he is correct, because we do have a trade deficit in goods, but then you also have another contingent of the government saying, no, we have a trade surplus with Canada. But in a sense, they're also right, because they're talking about trade in goods and services. So we really need to get on the same page before we can have a discussion as to kind of why things are occurring, how big they are. We need to get on the same page as to what we're talking about.
We are just getting warmed up. Our conversation on the trade war will continue after a quick break, so stay with us. Welcome back. This week, President Trump announced another $50 billion in tariffs against China. This after announcing tariffs against Canada, Mexico, and Europe, our friends. Joining us for more are Michael Snipes, an economics instructor at USF Sarasota Manatee, Keith Fitzgerald, political science professor at New College, and Rod Thompson of the RevolutionaryAct.com. Michael, let me start with you. This week, as we just reported, the president announced another $50 billion of tariffs against China. That's on top of the move made before and China's response to that. What will that mean in terms of the impact on our everyday lives and the costs of anything involving cars, automobiles, and other electronic goods, and everything else?
Sure. I mean, all you have to do is go to just about any retail store and look at where things are made, and most things that most consumers buy are made in China. And so if we put a tariff or on those goods, on really any goods that we import from China, that's going to increase the price for a lot of different goods. And increasing those prices for a lot of goods that a lot of consumers buy, that's going to have a pretty big effect on the average consumer.
Some people will say to you, we are really not in a trade war yet. We could be. Why is that so scary to economists?
It's scary because there's a pretty well-known result in economics that says that free trade is good, just on net, for both countries. And the idea is that, well, if one country is better at producing something, it's cheaper to buy it from that country than produce it here. Well, we get the benefit of lower prices. The other country gets the benefit of selling it at a higher price. And when you get rid of free trade, when you impose tariffs or quotas or whatever trade policy you want to have, it eliminates that. So the whole reason why countries trade in the first place, taking advantage of arbitrage and price differences, that erodes away, and we really lose a lot of benefit from lower prices of consumption.
But Keith, let me ask you this. Isn't the president doing what Democrats have wanted for many years? Because we have complained about the loss of U.S. jobs, auto industry jobs, because of cheaper cars coming from, whether it's Japan, Korea, whatever. Isn't this something that Democrats have wanted to see in a very long time?
You know, I think it's sort of interesting that a lot of President Trump's views seem to be hardened in the 1990s. And this was a much more salient issue for Democrats, particularly in the industrial Midwest in the 1990s. Over the years, it's somewhat fallen back as a major issue precisely because we understand a lot of the benefits of having a trade regime. The Democrats actually created the free trade regime after the New Deal, and we've adjusted, the economy adjusted. So we do less in industrial export, but we do a whole lot more in service.
But the narrative in terms of whether you're talking about the unions or just working class folks is that China and these other countries are taking our jobs. So,
yeah, well, let me just say that China is taking our jobs, and they are taking our services, and they do steal our intellectual property, because one of the things I was saying is we move more into the service industries, and one of the most dynamic features of that is we think up ideas, and if they steal them, they're going right to the core of what our advantage is in the economy. So Rod and I actually sort of agree with this. China's been a bad actor, and you know, I sort of speculate that part of the reason we've let China get away with things for such a long time is that during the Cold War, we were happy to see them moving away from a strict communist model, and we sort of looked the other way as they did a lot of things. We say, come on into the club. Well, now they're in, and it's time to really straighten up the rules about them. But you know, it has nothing to do with Europe or Canada. That part of it is just crazy to me.
But Rod, what I don't understand about the president's strategy is the politics of it from his perspective when we talk about the tariffs on Canada, for instance, primarily over the dairy industry, which everybody who talks about this says that is primarily going to affect you know, the midsection of our country, the farmers, the Trump states, and that this back and forth with Canada could, frankly, to use the word, screw Trump voters in the Midwest.
I wouldn't think on a large amount, since it's Canada that is putting the tariff on like milk imports and that sort of thing.
And pork and other things
right.
like that.
So this would benefit the heartland to a degree. I think politically speaking, just quickly, the tariffs make a lot of sense back to China, because you're talking Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, these sorts of places where you could see benefit from that. However, Professor Snipes was talking about everybody kind of understanding now free trade and the value of free trade, and that's absolutely right, but that is not what we have had with China. And so maybe we're all in agreement here that China should be a target, should be a focus. They need to be forced, and it will only come through force, they need to be forced to come to the table with a much better trade agreement that will be beneficial to American consumers and companies.
But you said earlier you really do not understand the president's emphasis on Canada.
No, I don't understand it at all. Because it's peanuts, really. I mean, it's really small. My suspicion is because when you would talk to Trudeau or somebody and he said, look, can you do something about these tariffs on these products and everything so that we can have freer trade? And Trudeau said no, he got ticked off. That's my guess.
Keith, no, go ahead, Michael.
was going to say, it's one of those rare instances where all three of us agree on something. I think it's kind of interesting.
Free trade's good.
Right, but I still don't, I mean, I don't understand the argument, the president's argument, when it does come to Canada. Rod says that this would be helping Trump voters in Trump states that have farms, dairy. But if Canada is putting tariffs on American dairy, going back to Canada, like pork and milk, I don't see how that helps American farmers.
Well, and I keep track of Iowa, where I lived for a while, and they're not happy at all because it's hurting their grain exports as well as some of the dairy stuff. One of the things about just the politics of trade is that it's regional. It's a classic kind of populist issue because there's always somebody getting hurt, somebody benefiting from the United States, which, by the way, has never been an angel in these trade regimes themselves. We set up the rules to benefit ourselves a long time ago. And that doesn't hurt anybody in particular. So you can play off the anger that a specific region of the country has, and it really doesn't hurt you with anybody because the general good is not divisible.
Rod, I want to give you a moment here, but then I want to move to closing thoughts here, and I have a question for all three of you.
Yeah, the trade imbalances, I think this is a good example of the difference between Canada and China. We have, obviously, it's disputable, we don't have much of a trade imbalance with China, so that really shouldn't, or I'm sorry, with Canada, so it shouldn't be an issue. But trade imbalances in and of themselves are not bad because I have a trade imbalance with Publix and with Racetrack and with my doctor, and that's a good thing, right? Trade imbalances that are driven by government subsidies, such as China does, and by high tariffs on imports, such as China does, that's a trade imbalance that's not a good thing.
So what does this mean to folks and consumers in our area and the state of Florida in general here? Because we've been talking about dairy farmers and so forth. I would imagine, Michael, you would say that the biggest problem to us consumers around here would be the cost of things, whether it's in the grocery store or the mall.
Yeah, that's going to be the most immediate way, and that's going to be the most direct way that a lot of people in Florida are going to see a lot of the effects. I mean, I'm not entirely sure about the dairy industry in Florida. I don't think it's that big. So that particular piece wouldn't really hurt Florida. But, you know, China's putting a lot of tariffs on agricultural goods, and agriculture is the second biggest part of the Florida economy. That's one place that it could affect Florida.
Keith, as a political scientist, are you concerned about the impact all this has had on our very best friends, Canada, the UK, France, the rest of Europe?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me as far as the politics of this internationally, the United States is a very powerful country economically. But where we really get our power and our real leverage is in what political scientists call soft power. It's the reputation we have of people who take care of the whole international regime, who protects human rights, who make things go. And we're giving that away really quickly by initiating a trade war. The stories of the last few days about appearing to the world to look like we're walking away from our commitment to human rights. We're losing our influence, and that's the most important asset we have.
Does that bother you?
Well, no, because I disagree a little bit with the take on that, as far as, particularly on the human rights one, but that's a whole different issue, not for tonight. I don't think we are. Again, the Canada thing, I wish we wouldn't do. The China thing, we absolutely have to do. The European Union is kind of in between the two, right? And now the UK is separating itself. But the European Union does have an awful lot of tariffs, and it does make it harder for us to import there. It's why part of the reason we have a trade imbalance. We probably shouldn't have any real trade imbalance to speak of there because we're so equal in a lot of ways. And so I would like to see the president hammer out a much better trade agreement with China, an improved one with the European Union, and just walk away from the Canada thing.
Right, we have to leave it there, but before we go, we want to share with you what some of you had to say about last night's show on Governor Rick Scott's ban on voting on college campuses. The United States has had some of the lowest voter turnout in the so-called civilized world, just over 55%. As for millennials, just over 49%. Then why in the world is the state of Florida trying to ban early voting on college campuses? We went to Facebook for your thoughts, and Joni says there's only one reason folks want to make it harder to vote. Richard says there is nothing democratic about restricting the ability to vote, especially when individual groups are targeted. And John says only in a backward-thinking swamp state filled with ignoramuses would there ever be a ban on early voting on college campuses. Well, if you'd like to join the conversation on tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. We want to thank our guests tonight, Michael Snipes, an economics instructor at USF Sarasota Manatee, Keith Fitzgerald, political science professor at New College, and Rod Thompson of the revolutionaryact.com.